Out there in the audience, first of all, this is my first time to be in the boardroom. What a great place! I feel like y'all are out in left field or something, or center field at Ranger Stadium. But welcome to everybody. We're delighted everybody's here. I know that the commissioner and Mr. Heldenfels will be joining us. They had a meeting at 1:30, and they'll be joining us shortly after that meeting, hopefully by 2:30. As usual, I want to remind everybody that we're being broadcast live today, and I'd like to jump into the agenda. I will tell you, I'm so glad to see Joe Hinton here when I walked in, because Durga had to be in Houston today because of some medical procedures for his daughter, and I was a little bit worried about our quorum, and I saw our quorum when we walked in, so I was glad. So we're few in number but mighty in power. So first action item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the January 26 Committee on Agency Operations meeting. Those were sent to each of the members before this meeting. Are there any questions or corrections to those minutes?
Move for approval.
Move. Could I have a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Agenda item 3 is I'm going to call on Dr. Alonzo to introduce the staff and the topics for today's meeting, and he will give us some background on each of them. Now, all of these, as you know, in the Deputy Commissioner's report, there are no action items. These are updates, but we look forward to it. Dr. Alonzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's the first report on the agenda is our standing ARA report, or report on the ARA program. Today's report is one of those good news, bad news reports that I have for you. The good news is that things are going very well, as you will hear in a minute, and later on in the audit report. The bad news is that I'm calling on Mr. Dan Griffith to present this report for the last time, as he has informed the agency that he has accepted a job in one of our fine institutions and will be moving on to do bigger and better things. And more on that in a second. But at this time, I'd like to call on Dan to give his report and to introduce one of his staff members. Dan?
Thank you, Arturo. Good afternoon, Chairman Ryder and members of the committee.
Turn your mic on.
I don't think it's on.
Thank you, Arturo. Good afternoon, Chairman Ryder and members of the committee. I'm Dan Griffiths, Director of the Government Services Stimulus Program here at the Coordinating Board. We appreciate the opportunity to report on the status of the Department of Education grants program, and have accomplished several milestones this prior quarter, which are presented as bullets on your single-page report. As we proceed with reimbursing our subrecipient universities, community colleges, and state agencies, we are also closing out those projects which have spent down their funds. As of the end of March, we closed out 126 projects with a total value of $530 million. Out of that $530 million in reimbursements, our subrecipients have only left $40 unspent.
Wow.
We are on target to complete our planned desk reviews, on-site monitoring visits, and program reviews by the end of June. This process has allowed our program staff to closely manage projects that were assessed to be at higher risk than others, and to monitor their spending as we attained our 75% schedule milestone in March. So we have approximately 6 months left on the GSF program, which ends in on September 30th. The A133 statewide single audit was completed on the ARA program in February, with only 2 procurement findings at one state agency and one university who are subrecipients on the GSF program. This was a significant accomplishment for the Coordinating Board team, considering the high volume of reimbursements processed and increased levels of reporting and data validation. Our monitoring plan has paid off, mitigating nearly all of the risk identified at the beginning of this program almost 18 months ago. For this quarter, we are forecasting approximately $40 million in expenditures and have begun planning with the Governor's Office stimulus team for the completion and the closeout of the GSF program. You will note our status matrix at the bottom of the report for data as of March 31st. which reflects the GSF program at 91% spent and approximately $62 million left until the end of the program in September. Attached to the status report, you'll find a chart which shows our planned versus actual spending. We are slightly ahead of schedule in actual spending and have shifted our team's primary focus from reimbursement processing to meeting the goal of completing our scheduled monitoring activities in June. The U.S. Department of Education will be on site here at the Coordinating Board in July for their monitoring of our program. Finally, as Arturo mentioned, this is my last week with the Coordinating Board, and I'd like to introduce Art Villarreal, the ARA Grants Manager, who has been tasked to wrap up this program. Art has been served with me and our team since its inception in late 2009. Art?
Good afternoon, Chairman Ryder and members of the committee. I'm Art Villarreal. I'm the ARA Grants Manager for the Coordinating Board, and I've been here several years, so appreciate the opportunity to continue with the program and to finalize it. So if you have any questions or need program information, just contact me or Dr. Alonso, and we'll get you that information. Thank you.
Okay. So I wanted to open up the questions from the committee on the ARA program.
Any questions?
I don't know if it's appropriate or whatever, but it's apparently part of the audit report, which I'm assuming is public.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that will be presented formally here,
Okay.
but you know, any questions in that
Okay.
probably.
You had two findings. What were they? Was it an oversight or
The audit team had a finding at the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, who's one of our subrecipients. And they had a procedural flaw in their contracting. One of the things that we had provided them as flow-through funds was approximately $362 million to purchase textbooks for the 2010 school year. And as the auditors dug into their contracts with the different publishing houses and vendors, they found a couple of instances where they were not following procedures. So TEA went in and cleaned that up, and they actually revised their overall contracting procedure. Those contracts with publishing houses sometimes are multiple year agreements, and so they actually had the opportunity through this finding to go in and fix that. The other finding was with West Texas A&M University. And there again, they found a flaw in their purchasing procedures where they did not include proper debarment and suspension forms for their local vendors to sign off on. So we reached out to them, and just in a matter of weeks, or a week or two actually, I worked with their purchasing director and their vice president there for finance, and we got their procedures squared away and all of their documentation in place, not only to meet the corrective action plan that we put forward in the audit report, but also to prepare if they were going to be re-audited on those issues in the future. So those were the two findings, and it mostly centered around procurement and their processes.
Other questions? I just want to, and Joe was around when we originally started the ARA program. This is news to me, Dan. I mean, this is one thing that Arturo didn't tell me about. But I want to tell you, this was probably, and Joe can attest to this, it's probably one of the biggest concerns we had when we got assigned the task of monitoring these funds, the majority of these funds not even being associated with our agency, not a whole lot of it with education. So I just want to say, you know, we met Dan when we first hired him to run this program, and you have absolutely, from my perspective, exceeded my expectations. It was one of our bigger concerns. I can remember Arturo sweating bullets for a number of months before you came to do this, and I really mean that with all my heart. You have done an absolutely great job.
Thanks.
And it's our loss, and whoever you're going to work for, it's their gain, and whatever your role will be. Art, for you, the good news is there's no place to go but down, you know. So I say that, yeah, he has done such a great job, but you will do a great job finishing this program out for us. and obviously we want to finish as strong as we've carried through this. And I also just want to recognize all of your staff people who have, even though you've led them, there's been a lot of other people in this agency that have made sure that we stayed on top of this program. So publicly, I just want to acknowledge you, and can you tell us where you're going? Or is that...
Yes, I've accepted a position with the University of Texas at Arlington, but I'll be managing a regional program office here in Austin, so we get to stay here with family and grandbabies.
Fantastic.
That's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'd just like everybody to join me in just recognizing the great job that Dan's done for us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Sure.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you. And if I could just take a minute to add to your comments there, not to repeat, but to add and also publicly express my appreciation to Dan and for his staff and to his staff for the service that they have brought to the agency. When we brought in Dan, we knew it was going to be a big challenge. He has not disappointed us. Thanks to his expertise and his experience and his hard work, we can state unequivocally that the administration of this program is of exceptional quality. And as you will hear during the audit, and Harold has already alluded to that, we really passed with flying colors for the first year expenditures of those federal funds. We also have been told repeatedly from staff at the governor's office, whom we work very closely with, that they use our program as a model of best practices, and they make that clear quite often. And most of this is due in large part because of Dan's efforts and because he has worked so hard to establish those processes that will get us through the end of the program. I would add that Dan's contributions were not limited to the ARA program. That was his primary role. That's what we brought him in for. But he has established some practices that will be of tremendous help to the agency as a whole, and for that we are thankful. Because of that work, hopefully I will not be sweating the same bullets that I was at the beginning of the program as we bring it down towards the end. We will truly miss Dan, but as you said, we wish him the best in his new endeavors. Thank you, Dan. The next report, Mr. Chairman, members, is the financial report. This is the report that I sent to you a couple of weeks ago for your review. It's the standard format that we have used for the last couple of years or so. It's a high-level report that serves as a management tool for my staff and I as we go through the monthly status of the accounts. I use it quite often to ask a lot of questions and to review where we are. We developed this report as our budget is broken up into the operating budget and the trustee budget. We present it that way. We certainly welcome any questions at any time. Some of you have already contacted me with questions, and we appreciate that. At this time, Mr. Chairman, members, I will be glad to respond to any specific questions on our quarterly financial report.
Any questions from the members?
No.
Arturo, I said on page 11 of 12, that's where it's outlining our outstanding bonds and all of our loan funds. Are we in compliance with all our bond agreements right now? I mean, there's not any on all these funds, our interest and sinking fund and.
Yes, sir. I can state that we.
Well, it's something we just normally don't. Dan, maybe you can address that, but. I'm almost sure the answer is going to be yes, but I think it's a question that we need to be looking at every time to make sure that we stay in compliance with those.
I think the only outstanding issue we had was the investment agreement with TTSTC that we entered into in August of 2009. So it's been a couple of years ago. That was specifically related to bond covenant requirements. So we had to move our interest and sinking fund balance out of the comptroller's pool into a separate investment agreement with TTSTC. So that's been up and running for the last 2 years. Really, that's the only issue that was brought to attention that was specific to bond covenants. We'll talk a little bit about another issue in a few minutes, but as far as bond covenants goes, that's the only outstanding issue, and that was resolved a couple of years ago.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Arturo, thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Chairman, the next report on the agenda is our somewhat standing report that you and other members have asked for us to bring forth to the AOC, and that is on our facilities. We're happy to report that progress continues. We've had a few delays here and there. I don't think that is unusual when you engage in construction of this kind, renovations of the entire building. Last week, the Commissioner's offices moved back into the newly renovated and redesigned space, which completed Phase 3 of the construction schedule. And this week, they began Phase 4A, which will renovate the remainder of the second floor. And we expect that 4A, which is broken up into two phases because of the logistics, to be completed sometime toward the end of May. We will then move to 4B and Phase 5, which will be the renovation of one side of the third floor. And our estimates are that by the end of September, barring any other major delays, we should have our construction completely finished. As you have noted, Mr. Chairman, we're pleased with the new looks. This room being one of the examples, and it's coming along. So I'd be glad to again respond to any questions.
Any questions? Okay.
The next item, Mr. Chairman and members, is the report on IT governance/lean processes. At the January meeting, I introduced to you our newly arrived, at that time, Assistant Commissioner for IT Services, Mr. Sid Hodgson. And one of Sid's first tasks when he joined the agency in charge of IT was to conduct a thorough assessment of the IT department and recommend both short-term and long-term action items that will improve the services that we provide to the agency and to our clients. Among the top recommendations that Sid came up with was the creation of an IT governance committee that will provide oversight and direction on our IT initiatives. I've asked Sid to take us through a brief presentation on that IT governance and that steering committee, and at the end, maybe Mr. Heldenfels will be here by then, but he asked me to also mention or report back on our lean processes, which, though is not part of the IT governance committee itself, it will be rolled out in the IT department, so I've tied it into this report. So, Sid, I would like for you to go ahead and I'll ask you to go through your presentation.
Certainly. Thank you, Arturo. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. As I believe you all know, I started here December 1st, and as Arturo mentioned, I spent a good part of the first month and a half here just meeting with a lot of people around the agency, interviewing all my own staff, and really conducting a comprehensive assessment of the IT organization, identifying our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, challenges, and developing a set of short-term priorities as I perceive them for the IT organization. As Arturo already mentioned, by far the greatest need that I perceived was the introduction of a more effective and more formal IT governance mechanism or processes. As the slide indicates in front of you, the Gartner Group identifies IT governance, or defines IT governance, as the processes that ensure the effective and efficient use of IT in enabling an organization to achieve its goals, or very simply, who decides and by what processes. Now, the fact that we hadn't had effective governance within the organization really manifested itself in several ways, as you can see on this slide. First of all, there's been clearly a lack of long and short-term planning for IT initiatives, IT strategies. There's been an absence of an overall enterprise information, data, and application architecture, and that is kind of a roadmap to how everything fits together, how we're going to address gaps in our architecture, and so on. There's been an absence of any formal mechanism and objective means for prioritization of IT initiatives. And that has resulted in obviously constantly shifting priorities, which is very frustrating not only for my staff, but also our clients around the board. They're never quite certain whether their priorities are being addressed or whether their projects have been pushed aside for some other perceived priority and so on. There's been an absence of formal project management, resource management, and project management portfolio processes and tools. Our systems development lifecycle methodology is very outdated. It's perceived as ineffective in producing results that are consistent with the requirements that were identified up front by our clients. We also had an internal audit finding which criticized our methodology for not including adequate involvement by internal audit and by our information security officer in our development efforts. There's been a lack of a formal estimation process. For the most part, the projects that have been identified in our backlog have not been estimated, so it's very hard to make decisions about priorities if you don't know how large the initiative is or how much it's going to cost. There's been often a lack of IT oversight and involvement in business-driven IT initiatives. Consultants might come in, develop an application, and then after they leave, my staff are expected to maintain that application even though they haven't been involved in the application development and perhaps may not even be familiar with the technology that was used. So that's been problematic. Communication's been a big problem. There's clearly been inadequate communication between IT and the business areas regarding the status of their projects. A couple of people described to me occasions where they had requested a specific application be developed. We assigned an analyst to document the requirements, and then 18 months later, there's nothing to show for it. They didn't know what happened to it. Resources might have been reassigned to another perceived priority, and they were never told about it. So a lot of communication problems as well. So why is governance important? Well, as I mentioned, almost unanimously, when I met with the executives around the organization and division heads, they identified the lack of a means to prioritize IT initiatives and projects as a major problem and irritant. Lack of governance led to many other problems that I described on the previous slide, such as constantly shifting priorities, uncoordinated, non-standard, non-documented initiatives, support problems, data integrity, and data integration issues. And most important in these times, with limited and decreasing resources, it's very important that we ensure that taxpayer dollars are in fact allocated to the initiatives with the greatest potential for the board overall and not just to the person who screams the loudest or perhaps has some funds available to develop something. So I'm happy to report that we have several initiatives underway to address some of these problems. First, we've established an IT steering committee consisting of the associate commissioner, the 2 deputy commissioners, and the 5 assistant commissioners. And that committee will be doing several things, but amongst its duties will be to look at the 100+ projects we have in our backlog and determine what the priorities are based on what's best for the board. I've reorganized my department and eliminated 1 director position and merged the application development and the reporting areas. I believe that will give us far greater flexibility in the allocation of resources to the priorities that are identified by the steering committee. We've acquired a cloud-based project portfolio management, resource management, and project management tool. That product is called Inotas. We're implementing that now. That product's also used by some other agencies and towns, such as TYC and TRS are all also implementing it. What we're also doing in conjunction with that implementation, we're bringing on board a lean project manager to assist us primarily in looking at our business processes surrounding project management, resource management, and assisting us in re-engineering those processes and ensuring that the software is configured to support those re-engineered processes. We've initiated formal project management training for my project leads, and the long-term objective is to get them certified as professional project managers. We have a new IT website being designed, which hopefully will address some of the communication issues. And using the Enotus tools, we intend to have dashboards on that site for monitoring IT performance metrics and also the status of the various projects. So if somebody wants to know the status of their project, they won't have to guess about it. They can go in there and look for themselves and see what's happening with their project. The SDLC system development lifecycle is being revised as we speak and updated. One thing we're looking at is introducing agile type methodologies for systems development projects. And all of our policy standards and procedures are currently being reviewed and will be updated and reflected on that new website. Dr. Alonso will be discussing the lean initiatives, but before we turn it over to him, do you have any questions on any of these issues I've discussed here?
Questions? Sid, a question I'd have is just, you having to come here in December, in terms of the, are you at a point that you thought you'd be at right now? I mean, when you came in and you looked at the challenges that we had in the agency from an IT standpoint, and you established your timeline for what you want to accomplish, are we where you thought we'd be? Are we in front of it, behind it?
I think we're doing fairly well. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, establishing the steering committee is a good first step, but to make that committee effective, we have to provide that committee with the tools and information they require to make their decisions. And I've discussed that in our committee meetings to date. Getting this Enotus product up and running is a big step in providing them with the information. What it will enable us to do is to identify criteria by which that committee can make their decision, such as is it decisions on priorities based on cost, is it based on risk, is it based on legislative requirements, scope. So there's a lot of factors to take into consideration in determining priorities. So until we get that tool up and running and can use it to assign resources to projects and monitor their usage, it's going to be an evolving process. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we're making good progress.
Is there any specific timeline that you've established in terms of just methodologies and things that you want to see accomplished within certain periods of time?
Well, I'd like to see our policies updated by mid-year. We're working on that right now. We've actually been working on it for 2 months. And again, it becomes a matter of, it's not a full-time job for anybody, so my managers and their staff are doing these things as they can in conjunction with other priorities. We've had several openings in our staff which we're unable to fill because of the staffing freeze. So everybody's pretty much under the gun in terms of workloads. But my hope is to get all those policies in place and to get that software product implemented within the next 2 to 3 months, certainly.
I think it'd be helpful, Sid, both you and Arturo, for this committee, I think we need to have this update every quarter so we really understand what progress is being made. But secondly, and if it can't be done, tell me, okay? I mean, I don't want to throw something out there and create more work, but a lot of people in the room know me. I'd really like to see us establish, if there's a timeline of tasks that we want to get accomplished between now and next quarter or 6 months. I think that helps us. I think that helps us understand what are the expectations that you're setting for the staff who got, especially, I guess you'd said, all this, I guess, deputy commissioner, associate commissioners, 5 assistant commissioners. Because the real key is how well you do your job is the collaboration, the buy-in you get from the governance committee. So, I think to help us make sure that we stay on top of it as agency ops, having some type of timeline as to what your expectations are so we can kind of track that as opposed to trying to go back and say, no, what was it we said last meeting? I think that would help us stay on top of it. And I don't know how the other committee members feel about that, but personally for me, that'd be helpful.
Be worthwhile.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I may just mention, and Sid's already alluded to this when we talked about the staffing challenges that we have. One of the things that has sort of put us on hold, if you will, as far as the direction and not strategic direction, but how much we accomplish and how fast is the uncertainty about the 12-13 budget. Both introduced versions of both the House and the Senate versions of the bill, appropriations bill, cuts us by, I believe, 25%. I can't remember the exact amount. It's a substantial cut.
Substantial cut. In terms of my resources, if nothing changes right now, I'd be looking at reductions in probably about 14 FTEs.
So all of that, and we're working.
Out of a total of how many?
36 is the current allocation.
So, and that's not to say that I'm trying to make an excuse. That's to say that there's a lot of uncertainty, not just for SIS department, for the agency as a whole, but that's one of the things that's bearing on our mind as we try to roll this out. And we'll certainly do the best we can with the resources given to us, and we'll make it work.
Well, to me, makes it even more important for us to really understand, because if we get cut back in human resources as a result of the budget implications, then all the requirements for IT are going to still be there, and how are we going to accomplish it with limited resources? So again, I don't want to create work. That's not what I'm trying to do. I just want to make sure that we as a board and as a committee understand what the challenges are, so we can effectively try to help you address those.
Thank you, sir.
And so the last part that I had mentioned that I would cover is the part about the lean processes that Fred has asked us continuously to look into and to implement at the agency as a sort of be a leader in the state and lead by example. Last fall, we issued an RFP to get an outside contractor to help us implement some lean processes, specifically in the resource management initiative. I found out after the proposals started coming in, and we put together an evaluation team. I think we got something like, I can't remember, 7 or
7, I think it was.
7 proposals, put together an evaluation team within the agency to evaluate the proposals and to make a recommendation to me. We started finding out that I had left the requirements, and this was by design, the wrong decision, but too open, too general, and we were having trouble really doing a good job of evaluating the proposals.
Will you go back? I lost you there.
Okay. This was the RFP that we issued last fall. So they came in, and they were all over the place because of I had not put the requirements or the deliverables clearly like I should have. And I thought I was doing the right thing so that we could leave it open for all types of lean process or different types of lean processes to be introduced to the agency, but it caused more problems than it was going to solve. So with commissioners' concurrence and Fred's knowledge and approval, we canceled that RFP. By that time, well, before that, when Sid first came in, and he's already talked about, he had purchased this Enotus tool, which is a software to help with the portfolio management. And so we're taking a different direction. We are going to, in conjunction with the implementation of Enotus, come up with some lean concepts. We will contract through a DIR-approved vendor, which precludes us, or not precludes us, but allows us to go without having to go through the bid process, because they've already been bid to DIR, and come up with what we're calling a proof of concept that will be, once we learn the methodology and how to implement some lean processes, be able to show that as a proof of concept and how it works, and roll it out to the rest of the agency. So we're excited about that, and I think that it's going to be a much better approach And so we're working on that. We're in the, it's much more focused. It will standardize our processes where they need to be standardized, or one of the places where they need to be standardized. And the other thing that we found out is that it was this focused approach in the IT department. It doesn't run up into the problem that we were running up as we were trying to roll this out agency-wide, with staff being so tied up with the session that it's going to give us the opportunity to really come up with this proof of concept and roll it out in a much more efficient manner. So that's where we are with our lean processes, and I'm thinking that that will work out better for us. Be glad to answer any questions.
Has Fred been real involved in working with you on this?
He has, yes. And given quite a bit of feedback.
Okay. I just want to really make sure that the chair and vice chair, because I know this is something that we've been so focused on. And,
yes.
And I guess, will you just explain to me, what's the difference if we would add deliverables in the 7 proposals? Okay. Would that have been a broader, wider scope approach than the approach that we're taking through this proof of concept approach?
Yes, it would have been, and our plans were to implement it in all aspects or all sections of the agency instead of the focus approach that we're taking now.
I've got you. Okay. Any other questions or about it? I know that Chairman Heldenfeld is not here yet. He ought to be following Commissioner M pretty soon. So, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Sid. Appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, the last report that I have under the Deputy Commissioner's report is a report on a program review that was conducted by the U.S. Department of Education on our federal loan program. I included it in this section because it is not really an audit. It is they call it a program review report, and so I felt that it fit better here. The report that we finally got, our final determination letter, I believe it was last week, is a report that concludes more than 5 years of work with the department on some issues that had been identified back in a A133 audit several years ago. We are glad we had done an analysis. We knew that we had and agreed that we had overbilled the department for some of the administrative fees. They have reviewed our analysis and issued that final determination letter, and I'm glad that we'll be putting closure on this issue. So I'd like for Dan to kind of take us through the background and where we are and what this means to the agency. Dan.
So, Mr. Chair, I have a 20-minute talk or a 5-minute talk. I'll leave it up to you on
in between
how far in the weeds you want to get. Mr. Hinton, I'm glad that you're here because this really started in 2006. We had an audit in 2006 by the State Auditor's Office, and for the first time they took a judgment view of our loan portfolio. So they looked at every loan that we had made in the federal family education loan program. So it was a thorough audit of everything in our portfolio, which I think when you started on the board, one of your initiatives was to make that happen. Unfortunately, it's taking us 5 years to get to a final conclusion on that. Now, as Arturo has pointed out, we got a final determination letter from the department last week, and so this is kind of the bringing it up to current. Let me go back in time a little bit and give you a little bit of perspective of what these particular issues were. There were 7 findings made in 2006. 4 of those findings have subsequently been closed. The other 3 findings continued to be, they were like festering wounds at the department because they didn't really know what to do with them, nor did we have really any clear way of getting them the information that they needed. So in a series of letters back and forth that started in 2008, trying to find some kind of a meeting ground that we could meet to find out, well, what is this financial financial liability, this overbilling that occurred in the federal loan portfolio dating back to the 1970s. So this was a long-reaching issue that had been going on for many, many, many years. In 2009, the department came and did a program review. So the department actually came on site in the spring of 2009 and did another thorough review of the loan program, the federal loan program, looking at loans made between 2003 and 2008. So they took a 5-year window, which is very broad, during the time that we were doing our conversion to the new loan management system in 2007. So there are a lot of moving parts going on, and that's when they did their final review. Almost immediately after that program review in 2009, we sent a letter back to the department with the lead person that was on site doing those review with essentially a comprehensive analysis of this overbilling of special allowance payments. So the coordinating board acknowledged that yes, we had overbilled, and we had overbilled for a long period of time. We had come up with a methodology to capture what that exposure was as part of this program review. So in a letter we sent to the Department of Ed, we outlined what our methodology was and the sampling method that we used, and essentially defining kind of a worst case scenario that totaled about $270,000 of financial or overbillings that the coordinating board had done over the years within the program. So that was in the fall of 2009. We essentially, other than making phone calls back, didn't hear anything back from the department until March. When they sent their final determination findings, we responded in concurrence with their findings because their findings essentially mirrored exactly with what our proposal was from March of 2009. So we responded back, and the commissioner responded back, and they closed 4 of the 7 findings. 2 of the findings were relative to this $270,000 overbilling, and there was 1 finding that resulted in a $200 discrepancy due to a reconciliation in 2004. So from a we would like have not to have had this happen. We feel like that the resolution of this particular issue is fair and it's reasonable from the coordinating board's perspective. I don't want to say excited, but we're excited that we're able to close the book on this particular audit because it's been out there for such a long time. And I'll be happy to answer any specific questions you have about this particular issue or with our conversion to Helm in 2007 and with some cleanup that went on in 2008, we feel like we've closed the door on all of these issues such that they won't reoccur. So we're very confident in our ongoing operation with regard to the federal program. We continue to get A133 audits every year, most recently by KPMG. So we feel like we've really truly put this issue to rest. And Mr. Hinton, I know that you and I have had conversations many years ago. This was the last issue that was outstanding, and I feel very comfortable and confident that this final resolution from the department is good for the coordinating board. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you've got.
Joe, you have any comments or
No, I'm
questions?
just thrilled to death that we've now closed the books on this particular issue. And hopefully we don't ever have to hear about it again.
Yeah.
But, Dan, what, was it a procedural thing that we were overbilling? How did it ever happen to begin with?
The old, and it probably sounds pretty simple now, but the old mainframe, the judgment portfolio wasn't, for lack of a better word, wasn't captured adequately within the mainframe programming, and there were certain switches that had to be set either on or off. These particular accounts, the switch never got set. So, and again, this is back to the 70s, and it's disabled or borrowers that had died that we should not have been collecting special allowance payments on. That switch never got either programmed or never got set in the old mainframe. And because they had occurred for such a long period of time, there wasn't any, and we hadn't been audited on a judgment portfolio. So these were loans that were residing outside of the view of what our normal audit process was for years and years and years. Only when the auditors came in and looked at the entire portfolio was this even exposed. So once it was identified, then those switches were set. So it was a simple fix, but then the issue with regard to closing out the audit was, well, how much was overbilled? Well, you had 35 years of potential overpayments that were made, and we didn't really have a clear understanding about which loans and at what time did they switch over, because of the record keeping in the mainframe wasn't as robust within our judgment portfolio as it needed to be. So it was a confluence of factors. You know, at the end of the day, when the switch was actually set, you know, we capped it off. Then the only issue became, well, how much was it? And that's, we spent many years trying to determine what was the most logical way to determine what that amount was. And I don't think the department really had I don't think they really knew how to get at it. And until they came for their program review in 2009, where the parties got together, did we actually flesh out the methodology that looked, yes, that makes sense from both of our perspectives. We'll go run the numbers, and the $270,000 is the outcome of that analysis.
But the 270 was for that 5-year period?
The 270 was for the life of the program.
For 35 years?
Yes. And again, this was not a common occurrence, but it was an occurrence. So if I had a borrower that was a deceased borrower that was in our judgment portfolio, we, the coordinating board, continued to request special allowance payments on that borrower, and we should not have. So it's not a very large population of students. The total disbursement number was on the order of 1,000 disbursements. So it wasn't an untenable amount of information. It was a matter of where in the chronology of time did those particular loans, when was that borrower deceased? And from that period on, we should not have gotten a special allowance payment for that particular borrower. And again, once we got the methodology worked out, running the model to create the number was relatively simple. But it took us that long to get comfortable with what that methodology was.
Dan, what are the next steps? Because, you know, y'all must have gotten the determination letter in between when you and I talked to Arturo.
That's right. We got the termination letter last week, I believe it was. And the next step is for us to settle that amount with the department. And they have indicated that they will close the books on this review.
One thing that I thought I remembered you saying is when we talked about this earlier before you had the determination letter, I think I asked the question, is this an issue that many of the board members, except for me and Joe and maybe Fred, I don't know if Fred was even here where did the Helm system and everything else. I don't think he was, but yeah, and I will say I want to commend Joe Hinton because Joe, that was kind of his day and night job, you know, and did a great job in helping lead us through that effort. And we're now at this final conclusion. But I guess my question really for you, maybe for the chair, Chairman Heldenfeld, is really, since this is such a new issue to the board, at the time Arturo and I talked, I thought it'd be appropriate to brief this committee on it because a lot of it predates many of our board members. My question is this an issue that needs to come up back before the board, or we just need to, you know, I mean, what's the next steps we need to take here? And then secondly is, in funding this 270, where does that money come from? How do we fund it? You know, those kind of issues.
Well, I'll talk to the top fund within the bond portfolio or within our interest and sinking fund is free and clear cash that the coordinating board has to make loans with and to take care of any kinds of issues. We had some issues in 2008 with regard to non-qualifying loans that were made. I don't know if you recall that, right, Mr. Chair. That pool of funds is essentially free and clear cash that you can use to make these kinds of payments, even though this is the last of these type of payments that will be made. And there's sufficient cash in that account to make this $270,000 payment. Arturo and I talked briefly. We had collected these funds and we're returning these funds back to the department, so there's not a contract per se, there's not a purchase order per se, it's a reimbursement. There's a mechanism that's in place where we make payments to the Department of Ed for special allowance. They make payments to us for interest subsidies on the Stafford portfolio. So the mechanism is there to make this happen. It's a matter of kind of at the board's wishes of, do you want to go to the full board tomorrow, or I don't know that we decided that it needed to go anything beyond the Agency Operations Committee, but that's certainly open for y'all's discussion.
I'll defer to Chairman Hellenfels. My feeling is I think we do need to apprise existing board members that we're closing this out, because to me it's the, I think the last chapter, in the situation. So I do think there's a lot of explanation that goes behind it to get you, if you're a new board member, to get you from A to Z, and you could spend a tremendous amount of time trying to dive into it, and Joe Hinton could probably spend a board meeting talking about the experience, but the question, I don't know if that's an effective use of our time. Somehow I do think we need to brief the board members to let them know it is a chapter that's been closed and what the settlement is that's being made. So.
Do you feel like you could provide an executive summary during the portion of
I bet I could if Dan will make me a very concise summary of it. So
The 5-minute one.
yeah, the 5-minute one.
Here are my notes.
Okay.
Fred, your mic's not on.
because there's not a lot of collective
Right.
and even less so after August, so
Yeah.
I think we should do that. Of course, I also think
Close. Sure. Okay. We'll be prepared, and
Would you or Dan just prepare some bullet points for me, make sure that I don't go into the 15-minute version?
we'll do that and it come up during your summary of the AOC reports.
That's good. It gives me something that's not on consent for my part of the calendar tomorrow, so it gives us one item. So, great summary. Thank you, and it's good to know it's being closed out. Okay. Is that the last item?
That's the last report, Mr. Chairman, and we're ready to move into the
Great.
action items.
Our first item under our agenda is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposals for selection of a bond tax program legal counsel to perform legal services for the agency, and I think Bill Franz is going to present this. And that is item 4A.
4A.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Ryder, members of the committee. Item 4A deals with our request that we come with about every 2 years. As you may be aware or recall, pursuant to Texas Government Code statutes, the Attorney General is vested with the authority to approve all contracts for legal services for representation of state agencies and state officers. In our last RFP was issued nearly 2 years ago. What we'd like to do is obtain approval to issue an RFP and go out probably within the next month or thereabouts to give us ample time to have bond counsel in place by August 31. We currently have Vincent and Elkins as our bond counsel, and I believe we have had them now for about 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. I would expect that they will bid on it again. I expect other folks will bid on it as well. I know 2 years ago, at your urging, I contacted every firm in the state of Texas that performed bond work for the state of Texas, one form or another. I will endeavor to do the same this time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions for Bill? Motion second?
Second.
Thank you.
I did have one question before the vote.
Mr. Chair.
Will the RFP include requests that they submit their latest hourly billing rates?
Yes, it will. We did that the last time as well.
You asked that last question.
Yeah, I will always ask that about legal services.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by the same sign. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
The next item on the agenda is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposal for selection of a financial advisor for the agency's loan program, including debt issuance for fiscal years 2012 to 2014, with 2 one-year extensions immediately thereafter at the agency's option. And I think Dan Weaver, Patrick Krishock, and Bill will present this. And this is agenda item B, 4B.
Oh, wasn't on. I could have sworn that Dr. Alonso was going to present this item. No. This is an RFP for our financial advisor. First Southwest has been our financial advisor for forever. This is your financial advisor for the loan program, and I guess I don't really have a lot of comments to make other than the fact that it's a key role within our agency because we are a lean staff on financial matters. Patrick and myself are the bonding experts, if you will, and our accounting staff does a bang-up job, but the true financial advisor for the board, we depend very heavily on the financial advisor. So this is a key role for you and for the agency for the ongoing management of the loan program. And we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions? Dan, it is 2 years. A 2-year contract? I can't remember.
It's for a 2-year with a series of 1-year extensions.
That's right. And do you remember how many we had respond to our last time we went through this? I mean, that's okay. But a significant number, didn't we?
I think we had 4 or 5 respondents the last time. Arturo, do you recall?
I don't recall, Bill.
That was, Chairman Rutter, that was about 4 years ago that one was last put out.
Okay. Could I have a motion to adopt the Commissioner's recommendation to issue a RFP for selection of financial advisor for the agency's loan program debt issuance for 2012 through 14 with the 2 one-year extensions immediately thereafter? Could I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Harold, second by Joe. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed by the same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. The next agenda item is 5A, and this is a discussion of the statement on auditing standards number 114, the auditor's communication with those charged with governance. And to present this item is going to be Susan Warren, partner with KPMG. And also an associate with her. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. We are here to do our SAS 114, which is in essence the planning for the 2010 financial statement audit. And you should have a presentation in your materials that I'll walk through. We do this every year. It's a standard part of the audit process. For those of you who have been through this, you'll notice the presentation will be a little bit different than in prior years. It's not that the standard has changed, but there's been some clarification from FASB and AICPA on more in-depth discussion in a few areas. So same topics, but just you're going to see some different points that are going to be brought to your attention during this presentation this year. The first page is the agenda. You'll see that we're just going to walk through basically your service team, the objective of an audit, responsibilities, methodology. The audit plan is the biggest piece of this. It's where you get your information on our perceived perspective on the risk involved and how we're going to address those through various audit procedures and work through that process. The client service team, Myself, Susan Warren is the audit partner, Rebecca Goldstein, who's the senior manager. The other names on here, the thing to take away from here is these are returning team members from the last 4 years. So your management team that has been serving the coordinating board is the same. In essence, Dee, who met her last year, she actually presented the results. She's the quality review partner. Her role is to kind of look over our shoulders in the final report to make sure that she doesn't see anything that's not in compliance with standards. Deborah Cook looks at the tax issues for a not-for-profit and a government entity. You do have a few of those, even though you're tax exempt. And so she does look at those to make sure there's nothing that we need to disclose in the footnotes. And of course, Suba, who's actually on maternity leave, is doing the IT, leading the IT process in Sid's group, working with that. And then we do work with Rosie Mendoza as part of our staff. And then, of course, Tony Tugby provides staff auditors as well. The overall objective of an audit, this is just what, out of the standards, when you hire somebody to do your financial statement audit, this is what you're supposed to get in essence. Your auditor is supposed to give you an opinion on those financial statements that have been prepared by management with the oversight of the AOC as to whether we believe in all material respects it conforms with the accounting standards. The second bullet just tells you that we do provide a reasonable but not absolute assurance as to being free from material misstatement or fraud. In essence, what that means is we don't look at every single transaction that flows to the agency. Obviously, from a time perspective, that's not feasible. And so that's where you get your reasonable but not absolute assurance piece. We do some test of controls, primarily over the financial reporting process, which we'll have a slide later that goes into a little bit more detail on that. The responsibilities section here is divided up into several sections. There's one for management, one for the AOC, and then one for KPMG. So we'll start with what management's responsibilities are when it comes to a financial statement process. Management is responsible for adopting the accounting policies, and what that means is basically how you're going to record certain transactions. And so if those change from year to year, then we are required to come in and look at that to see if the standards support that change. They're also responsible for putting together the financial statements, so summarizing all the transactions for the year and actually giving us something to audit. In doing so, they do put in place internal controls over financial reporting. You obviously need to comply with your laws and regulations that are applicable to the agency, making all the records available to the auditor. And at the end of the audit, management does have to sign a letter that's called a representation letter. It has a variety of items in it that basically says that it's kind of like a memory jogger list. Did you tell the auditors all these things if they were applicable? And so it's kind of a list the management has to sign at the end of the audit. And we actually give you a copy of that when the audit's over so you can see all those representations. The two more significant ones in there that we like to bring to your attention during planning is management is required to disclose if there's any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in controls that we would need to know about that occurred during the year. And of course, they have to acknowledge their responsibility for programs and controls over preventing and detecting fraud. Questions on management's responsibility? Okay, move to the next slide. The AOC's responsibility is to oversee what we just talked about, is to oversee the process for putting the financials together and establishing those internal controls. And of course, there is a combined responsibility for management and AOC about establishing those controls and setting the proper tone at the top regarding ethics and this culture of honesty at the agency. The next slide is KPMG's responsibility. In essence, what you have hired us to do as your external financial auditor. As we mentioned earlier, part of the objective of an audit is to express that opinion. We do that by reasonable but not absolute assurance. And here's where we get more into the detail of what controls and things we do look at required by the standards. We are required to evaluate the company's or the coordinating board's controls with risk of material misstatement due to fraud, and also management override of controls. So those are two areas of emphasis that we're required to design audit procedures around specifically. If we were to find any deficiencies or material weaknesses in that process, we are required to communicate that back to management and the AOC. And there's a list here of all the professional standards that we are required to follow in this process. The next section is kind of the audit approach and methodology. It's a kind of a big wheel, but I guess starting at 1 o'clock, just a couple things I'll point out to you, is we do develop our audit plan, which this is the last part of that process, and looking at the objectives and the strategies that have faced the business or the challenges of the board in 2010. From that, if you move down to about 3 o'clock, that allows us to outline the assessment of the risk. And then down at 5 o'clock, you look at the management and internal audit. We involve them in our conversations as well. And then moving all around, we basically do our audit work. And then at the end, we have a team that we put together, which was on the first page, which includes IT and tax, because we believe those are important risks to the agency. The actual audit plan, the scope of the work is the financial statements for 2010. Those are required to be in accordance with GAAP and GAS as a government agency. The state actually utilizes these reports when putting together the statewide CAFR, and so we have to comply with GAS for that. If there was a need for a management letter, which is our mechanism of reporting any control deficiencies, then we would issue one of those at the end of the audit. And then we also have the formal communication, or 114, where we come back at the end of the audit and say these were the results of the audit. Materiality. In essence, materiality is professional judgment on our part. It does change from year to year. The takeaway from this slide is materiality is not just a number. It has to do with quantitative and qualitative factors, the nature of a transaction. We do use that, though, in determining the nature, time, and extent of our test work. And we also use it if we come up with a discrepancy. We use it to determine if that discrepancy is material or not. In other words, do we need to make an adjustment, or is it something we can just pass on? So materiality is part of that process of not only setting up the audit process, but also evaluating the results. This is kind of a little timeline of how the audit process works. We began the meeting in January with management and assessing risk, and of course presenting to the audit committee basically the first quarter. April, we have started some of the IT work, and we've actually started some of the audit work related to investments, debt, and student loans. May will focus more on the income statement side of revenues and expenses, and then we'll issue the report in June and be back to present the results to the committee in July. Fraud risks that we indicated at the front are part of the audit process. There's different types of fraud, but what the auditing standards focus on are risk of fraud of financial reporting or theft of assets. And so those are the two that we kind of narrow our focus in on, and this is meant to show you how we do that. But to identify those fraud risks, we meet as an engagement team internally. So all those people on that front slide, we get together and have a planning, brainstorming session of what we think the risks are to the coordinating board based on our prior expenses, what we know about this year, and of course the economy and other influences that might impact the agency. Then we also perform fraud inquiries or SAS 99 interviews with respective members of management and some of the committee members. And from that, then we ask the coordinating board, okay, what programs do you have in place? What controls do you have in place to mitigate these risks that your management team has identified? That leads us down to actually testing some of those. We actually do test the design and effectiveness of what are considered anti-fraud controls as it relates to putting together your financial statements. And there is a particular focus on revenue recognition and risk of management override, especially with regard to journal entries, because those are, in essence, not a routine transaction that flows through the system. And so we do look at that. And also part of the audit is what we call unpredictability. What that means is we don't do the same audit procedures every year. There are certain things we have to do every year, like look at student loans, confirm debt, look at debt covenants, that type of thing. But there are certain accounts that will flow in and out every year, or maybe lower our scope on, test it a little differently to keep that predictability in there. Because the idea is that if management knows what the auditor is going to do every year, then they know where to hide something, in essence, if they want to. So part of our standards are that we try to prevent that by putting the unpredictability piece into the audit. Material weakness and significant deficiencies, these are internal control focused. The takeaway from these slides is these definitions are different than what you would have seen last year. Primarily because the government auditing standards was a year behind in adopting what the AICPA and the SEC through the PCAOB did to change their definitions. So since these are new, I would like just to point out a couple of things about these. Material weaknesses is the combination of deficiencies that is a reasonable possibility that something could go wrong in your financial statements. The key to take away from that is it doesn't mean that something has to happen to be a material weakness. It means that something could happen to be a material weakness. And so from an auditor's perspective, we often get feedback from our clients of, well, Susan, nothing happened. Why is this a problem? Well, it's not that anything didn't happen, it's that something could have happened. And so that's the key on the changing the definitions is if there is a hole, if you will, in your process, that then becomes a control deficiency if it meets these areas of magnitude. A significant deficiency is lesser than a material weakness. It's basically, it does say, and the definition has been changed to say it's less severe than a material weakness, but again, professional judgment of the auditor, it still merits attention to be brought to your attention. So you can see these definitions have changed if you were familiar with the other ones. The next page, I think we've actually talked about most of this already, is the severity is judgment-based, quantitative and qualitatively, and just that doesn't pin that something had to happen to go wrong. This slide here is really kind of the focus of the audit areas. I'll start on the left with significant audit areas, but these are the areas where we do every year focus on because they are the larger ones materially and also where the risk is from our perspective. Is your student loans, obviously looking at the existence and valuation of those. We look at your debt covenants and also just the balance of your debt. We look at the appropriations and the grant revenues. And then, of course, the financial assistance expenditures that relate to that and basically being dispersed to the respective universities. The one estimate in this process is the allowance for the student loans, which we also take a look at the methodology behind that to see if it's consistent with prior years and or if it needs to be updated or has been updated based upon changing circumstances of the agency or the environment. Significant unusual transactions, those are generally things like new accounting principles, which we have determined there are none of those for 2010. So there's nothing new from a governance perspective or a auditing standard that has to be implemented this year. There will be some for 11, but not 10. And then any additional commitments or contingencies, like if you get into, let's just say the construction is not finished at 8/31, then, or wasn't finished at 8/31 and had started, they would have some commitments there that you would need to disclose in your financial statements because you've let some contracts for that. So things of that type of nature that are more unusual, that are not your normal routine, would then need to be put into the financial statements. So we kind of take an inventory of those through reading minutes, talking to management, looking at different transactions to see if the financial statements have adequate disclosures. And of course, on the IT side, which I mentioned, we have started that work. We look at general information technology, which that is a fancy word for looking at access, program change, operations batching, looking at the overarching principles and policies of the systems. And then we also get down to application level controls, which are the checks and balances and the edits actually in the system. Like while you can't disperse a loan if you don't have these things checked off in the system. If certain flags aren't this way, it won't do this or it won't do that. Is interest being calculated right based upon grabbing the right rate from an interest table? So we're looking at detailed edits, checks, and balances in there that those produce, in essence, numbers that feed the financial statements, which is your interest income, your SAP that we just talked about, your interest on your loans from the government, your balances of your loan, your valuation, and of course that all goes into your allowance calculation as well. Questions on this slide, because this is the bulk of the audit process. This next slide is what we used to refer to as the brainstorming slide. These are some information where basically I have some questions, if you will, for the committee. And some of these are a little different than they would have been in the past, just based on experience and the accounting standards being clarified. But one of the things the standards require us to ask you, the first question here where it says the appropriate person, whether that be the committee chair or the full committee or maybe even the board, for communication of audit matters during the audit. What that means is, let's say we come up with a significant issue during the audit, a material weakness or a debt compliance issue or something of that matter that we discussed with management and we agree we have an issue. The question becomes, you're supposed to know in advance how the board wants that handled. Do you want to get a call from Dr. Alonzo saying you have a situation, or do you want to get a call from both of us, or do you want an email communication? How would you like that information delivered to the committee?
How have we done in the past, Arturo?
I believe you communicated with the chair, with the
I did in the past.
Yeah.
I'd like to also add to that, and we could do the whole committee if the committee would like, but if it's important if we do it just at the chair level, that we also include the vice chair, because Vice Chair Agarwal's will be taking over this committee, obviously, in August, and so I think it's really important for him to be very engaged in that process. It doesn't make, the committee's small enough where it doesn't make me any difference if all the committee members would like to see it. And I'd ask Harold, you or Joe, if y'all have any feelings on that at all. Harold?
No.
Then I'd just suggest we do the chair and vice chair, and that if there's an issue that we don't think we can get resolved, then we'll get the whole committee engaged.
That's generally how most clients do it.
Okay.
Has there been a change in the allocation of responsibilities between management and the AOC? In other words, have you changed the appropriations of duties, i.e. taking on more yourself or delegating more down to management during fiscal year 10?
Not that I'm aware of.
Any particular objectives, strategies, or related business risks of the agency that you have concerns about that I would need to know that I haven't already brought to your attention?
No, I will tell the committee that Vice Chairman Argral and I had probably about 40-minute conversation with Susan where we talked about what were the issues, the risk, those areas that we wanted to make sure were looked at. So I'm not going to rehash all that, Susan.
Right.
I assume you're saying exclusive of those items we talked about.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't have any others to add to that.
The next one on the page talks about nature and extent of communications expected when the AOC, with the AOC regarding misappropriations perpetrated by lower-level employees. This is actually a new question that came through the clarification. What this is getting at is occasionally you can have an employee within the agency where, I'll just use this as an example, it's what's in the standards, where there was a theft regarding petty cash. It's not material any means. The agency's controls have caught it. The issue's been dealt with. More than likely, you're probably already aware of it, just because of the open transparency of the coordinating board. Let's say you were not aware of it. The standards are asking is, do you want to be aware of that if it comes to the attention during the audit? In other words, we have the liberty of discussing that with management and stopping there because it's not material. But the standards are now saying you need to make sure your board knows, the governing structure knows that that's what you're doing if you have one of these instances. And if they don't care for that approach, then you need to basically bring it to the full board if that were to occur. So I ask you what your preference is.
Again, what have we done in the past?
I don't think we've had.
We actually have never had this situation in the past.
Okay, I'm sorry you said that. I think that still needs to be communicated to the Agency Operations Committee. I'd ask anybody else has.
Through the same means
Through the
as
same
other,
means,
to the chair
chairman,
and
vice
vice chair,
chair.
and then leave it to the chair and vice chair as to how to share that information. Agree.
Okay. We just heard a presentation from Dan on the Department of Ed review that's been closed, but outside of that, any other communications from regulators that we would need to know about? No?
Is there true?
No, there are none.
Okay. Joe? Okay.
Any particular concerns from the committee regarding the controls and programs the agency has in place with regard to preventing and detecting fraud that you would like to bring to our attention?
From my perspective, none other than those we already talked about in our previous call.
Okay. And the last one's basically just meant to be a catch-all. Is there anything else that's in, that you have concerns about that we haven't already discussed that you would like to bring to the auditor's attention during this planning process?
Any member of the committee? Okay. Thanks, Susan.
All right. The next slide is just a reminder of involvement of others. We do utilize internal audit as a role on our team as a staff auditor for about 200 hours of time. So that's meant to just remind you of that involvement. And the last part here, this is just for your information. This has nothing really to do with the audit, but KPMG has developed an Audit Committee Institute website that actually has government information as well. So I'm just giving you the links to that if you care to go look. And if you serve on other boards or other committees, there might be information there that would be useful to you as well. That concludes our prepared remarks. If there's any questions, we can take those.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yeah, thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Susan. Appreciate it. Look forward to the work. Thank you. The last agenda item is a discussion of the internal audit reports, and Tony Tigby will take us through the 5 reports which we have in our book.
Mr. Chairman, we actually have the first one, which is the A133 audit for FY10.
Oh, we sure do. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I apologize for that. Agenda item 5B, which I skipped over. A133 audit, fiscal 2010. Arturo's, you and Susan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have asked Susan Warren to, since she was here for the presentation of the audit, the financial audit, to present the results of the federal funds, the audit on federal funds that KPMG conducted on behalf of the state auditor. As you know, the audit is mandated by the Office of Management and Budgets, OMB, and in our case, it covers the Perkins funds, the federal loan program, and this year, for the first time, the ARA program. I am pleased to report that we had 3 findings, and of course, Dan Griffith has already alluded to those. We take those findings very seriously, even though, relatively speaking, the findings are minor and those that are under our control, not all the findings were under our control, have all been addressed. But since Susan was here, I had asked her if she would just quickly take the committee on the 3 findings, on the 3 programs that they did.
Sure, I'll do that. They have reference numbers at the top. I'll start with 11-38, which refers to the Perkins program that Dr. Alonso was talking about. What this says is it says it's a significant deficiency. In essence, if you read all the verbiage presented here, there was a logical access issue. In other words, we had some unauthorized users that could access certain parts of the computer systems. Specifically the TDR, which is your time and expense system, the Perkins grant management system, and then EDC, which is basically your interface with the community colleges. Now, the thing to take away from this is at the bottom of the page, it actually says that when we were actually doing our detailed compliance work, we noted no exceptions. So this is one of these what could go wrong type findings, where we didn't find anything that was wrong when we did our compliance work, but because the way the access levels were set up, it was possible for something to have occurred. As Dr. Alonso has alluded to, a lot of this was because of Team Protexis and DIR, which the agency has no control over. But unfortunately, the way the reporting process works for the federal government, it has to fall under the coordinating board's name because those are your systems that govern the grants the government gives to you. And so the agency response at the back does address the fact that you fix what you can and you're working with DIR to fix what the issues are related to them. The second finding is 11.
Susan, can I ask something?
Yes, sir.
And I think, Arturo, we had talked about this. I almost skipped over, but I think all 3 of these almost relate back to that same issue of Team Texas and DIR, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. I'll let you finish all 3, and then I'll come back to that. So you give us an overview of really where do we stand on that and make sure that we've done all we can. Okay.
The second finding, 1139, deals with the actual FFELP, or your Federal Family Education Loan Servicing Program. And similar type of issue, we had some administrative access issues related to Helms and HelmsNet, which are your loan servicing systems. Again, you'll notice it's a significant deficiency only, which means we did not notice any compliance issues when we did our detailed test work. Similarly, most of this relates to Team Protexis setup. And then the third finding, which is what Dan was discussing earlier, is the stabilization finding, or your ARA finding, 11-40 over procurement. He's already mentioned that 2 agencies were involved, TEA and 1 university, West Texas A&M. And in essence, they were both missing certain required elements out of their procurement files.
I'm waiting for Dr. Alonso to return. Okay. Questions at all for Susan regarding the A133 audit?
So is the last one more significant because it says significant deficiency and noncompliance?
Actually, it's not. If it was more significant, it would say material noncompliance. The difference on this one is that we actually did find something that was not compliant, i.e. the missing pieces of paper in the files, that they didn't have the antitrust or the suspension and debarment pieces in their contract. So I had to tack on the noncompliance word. But if it was more significant, it would say material noncompliance. What the key to take away on that is see the question cost box, it says 0. That basically means that we were able to rectify all of this during the audit process, and based on our professional judgment, there was no funds misspent.
And Arturo, can you just comment on the actions we've taken from what we've done to the extent we can with the issues with Team Texas?
Yes, sir. The DIR, of course, I think you know that the contract for the DCS, the Data Center Services, which went into effect in 2007, is a contract between DIR and right now IBM. It is in transition. DIR has issued a letter to IBM, basically telling them that they are going to terminate their services and have issued an RFP to look for new vendors. They are still in the process of evaluating the proposals. They have not selected a vendor yet, or as we understand, maybe multiple vendors. What we have done, Mr. Chairman, is almost from the beginning, or shortly after the beginning, I have communicated quite frequently with DIR and IBM, the Team for Texans, and made them known, or make known to them our concerns. The commissioner has been brought in on a couple of meetings that I had with them, so we continue to bring this to their attention, and we will continue to do so, and hopefully we will not have the same issues with the new vendor or vendors, but if we do, we will continue to communicate with them as we have in the past.
Any other questions? I don't think any of this requires.
It's a good audit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a great audit. Great audit.
Should have seen the first one.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Susan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan. Rebecca.
Susan, before you leave, this is probably the last time I'll have a chance to see you and your group, but I want to thank you wholeheartedly for the hard work that you've done and for the good work that you've done during my 6-year term on this board. And it was very difficult to get launched with the, as you remember very clearly, I'm sure, to even have audits of any kind. But I think that what's happened now, and you get a lot of credit for it as other people do, is that this is about as good as it's ever gotten, and maybe couldn't be done any better. I just want to thank you for your work, and it's all personal, because you and I worked very hard on getting a lot of the good things done, had a few people helping us, worked great.
Thank you.
So
it's been a pleasure to serve.
And you're going to get one more chance to see her. She's got to be here in July, so you got to be here for your farewell.
Oh, you going to be here?
I will be.
And we'll be getting the audit out
Oh, okay, well,
so
That's
you
okay.
really get to give her kudos at that time.
I just wanted to make sure that you understood.
I appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
We just want to make sure you're going to
We
be
had
here.
green eye shades and number 2 pencils in it.
Candles.
Yep. Yeah, we got 2 of those in jail.
Very appropriate comments. Okay, now Tony. Sorry, I was getting a little bit ambitious. The last agenda item will be our internal audits. We have 5 reports to consider for this meeting, and they start at 5C1.
Tony, can you make sure, excuse me, that the mic is on?
Oh, okay, it wasn't on. Our first report is the internal audit report on the financial aid audit of the Concordia University, Texas. We concluded that the institution complied with all the relevant coordinating board rules and regulations for awards of financial aid during fiscal year 2009, except for documentary requirements for Texas residency and awards based on hardship policy. The institution has refunded $16,297 to us, and they are implementing the other recommendations that we issued in the audit report.
Any questions on this?
Then
Really pretty good results
sir.
when you consider the number of awards going out under TEJ. Okay, next report.
The next report is the financial aid audit at Abilene Christian University. The university complied with all the relevant coordinating board rules and regulations for awards of financial aid during fiscal year 2009. We did not have any findings in that one.
Hold on, Tony, I'm catching up. Just a minute. Any questions? Okay. Next report.
The next report is the internal audit of the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant Program at the Coordinating Board. We concluded that the Coordinating Board accomplished the purpose of the program by providing $6,945,191 to 4,447 financially needy students enrolled in the public two-year institutions in fiscal year 2009. We only found inappropriate awards totaling $55,093, and that is equivalent of 0.8% of the total population. I'm happy to report that all institutions have refunded that $55,993 to the coordinating board. Some of the findings that we came across was the certified end of the year reports submitted by most of the institutions contained errors. And we've made some recommendations to improve the controls so that they will prevent unauthorized access to allocation data and the reconciliation of the data bases and updating their policies and procedures, and the management is in the process of implementing the recommendations.
Any questions? The only thing I would suggest here, Tony, is just with the pressure we've got on financial aid, you know, I think the one thing that caught my attention in this report was the lack of control issue, and so I just want to make sure that we've got, you know, it sounds like we have, that we've got that corrected, but I want to make sure that we, you know, stay on top of that with this being financial aid.
Yes, we made the recommendations, and I believe that if they implement them, and which they are, and when we go back to the follow-up audit, things are going to be much more improved. And I think the reason we had all these issues was because this is a new program that we have not audited before, so that's why.
So we've never audited TEOG before?
No, since I've been here, it's never been audited. So I guess it's because it's a small program. Yeah. But
okay. Any other questions? Okay. Next report.
The next report is item C4, and that is the audit of the data security at the UT Dallas Education Research Center. It was a joint audit between us and the TEA, and as a result of that audit, we concluded that the effective controls are now in place to provide a reasonable assurance that the student data assets are safely protected, and that unauthorized disclosure of confidential data is not going to occur at the center. We also concluded that the UTDRC is in compliance with the TAC 202 and the FEPA requirements. And we've made some recommendations for improvement in the area of the ERC budget and fee schedule, and the tighten up the confidential agreement, and the formal approval and audit of collaborating partners prior to to commencement of operations. And they've accepted our recommendations, are in the process of implementing them.
Questions? I'm confused about your comment on your summary page where it says, however, no assurance can be provided with respect to the access and security of the student data assets at the collaborating partner sites. I heard you say something about collaborating partner sites, such as the Austin Center. I guess my concern is, whose responsibility is that?
Mr. Chairman, may I clarify something?
Yeah.
I believe that that is the draft copy that we had sent to you back about a month ago.
Right.
In the meantime, when Tony presented the findings to the management here, we had him go back and check on that, and that comment has been revised because that the assurances can be provided now. Is that right, Tony?
Yes, sir. What really happened was that there were two audits going on. We had already gone to audit their Austin Center here. At the time we audited the UTD, we could not provide assurance. So that the second audit was going on where we're in the final stage. So it was decided that we need to update the UTD since we've audited the Austin Center, and we did get some assurance that things are okay. So that was why we.
Okay, I apologize. I was going off the prior draft. I read that first
yes.
time. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, and then the final report, I guess, is the status of the internal audit work plan for fiscal year 2011.
Yes, sir. The item 5C5, we do have the work plan status report from September 1, 2010 to February 28, 2011. And in the first group, which was the institutional audit, we have expended 1,876 hours out of a budgeted 3,460 hours. We do not have any problem here, but the only thing that I know you will be interested is in the audit of TEOG, which I reported the last time that we were exceeding our budgeted hours, and the reason for the excess hours was because when we originally finished the audit, the total number of errors that we found was 400 and something. It was a total of 404,107. So when we shared that first draft with the program the directors, and we had to work with them and the institutions in order to identify those institutions who had all those errors. Unfortunately, what we find out was that the data that we were relying on that gave us the total error of 404,000 could not really be relied upon, even though those institutions have certified them. So some of them were erroneous. So that was why we were able to reduce the amount that the institution actually owed us to be the amount that was really reported to be 55,993. So, and I know it is a wide gap, but that was what what happened, and it took us a lot of hours going back and forth.
Where is that on the audit work plan?
That is on the carryover. It is the second.
That's it. Yeah,
yes,
that's
sir.
it.
That is what happened then, sir.
Okay.
And
it's about 7 lines down under carryovers. Yeah. Other questions or comments about the work plan?
Tony, at the time of this report on the work plan, February 28th,
yes, sir.
the TEOG project was 85% complete. And by the way, I appreciate the percent complete figures being added to the project descriptions. Is it now 100% complete based on the earlier report? And what was the final number of hours that were incurred?
I don't have that final hours now here with me, but I could provide that to you. In fact, the next time we meet, it will be on our report anyway. It will update everything.
Hey, Fred, I don't know if this answers your question on the cover page. We had 346 hours in 2010 on TEOG. You know, that's the summary page right before it.
Right.
You see that, but you're talking about
This is through
now that we're
February
through with
28th.
it. Right.
Yeah, now that we're through with it, I assume more hours have been incurred.
Okay.
So this one project was over by 293 hours at this point. I'm just curious what the final was.
Okay. Any other questions at all for Tony and the work plan? Okay, thank you, Tony. I think this is a reporting item, and I don't think we have any other items, do we? So this concludes the Committee on Agency Operations Committee, and if I can have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by the same sign. Thank you.
Do we need to, do we have to come back after executive session and adjourn?
Yeah. Do we do it before we adjourn? Yep.
Well,
I would recommend that we not adjourn. Okay. How about a motion not to adjourn? Okay.
I don't know whether I'm going to second that.
Second. I forgot that we were going, and that was, I forgot that we were going to do that in this session as opposed to the board. So, and I don't have the language. Bill, do you have the language?
Is it the same as on the agenda?
Same. Let me look here real quick. I really do apologize. I read this agenda off Arturo's draft report 3 weeks ago, and so I didn't go back and compare it to the book. Okay. Committee will hold a closed session to deliberate the following matters. Under Texas Government Code Section 551.074, the committee will meet in closed session to discuss the annual evaluation of certain agency personnel. We will, that is effective at 3:42. Thank you. We'll re-adjourn to adjourn. I have a quorum now. The executive session is over as of 4:16. And before I ask for a motion to adjourn, one thing I'm sure that probably Chairman Heldenfeld will do tomorrow, but I just want to say, Eric, thank you. I think this is Eric's last agency operations meeting. And I'm sure that Fred will formally recognize him tomorrow in the board meeting, but I just want to say thank you for all the great work you've done. You know, we always learn a great deal from the student board member, and we wish you the best. Wish you the best in your job search, and hopefully we'll give you a good farewell tomorrow. So thanks for all your effort on this committee.
Thank you, sir.
I really appreciate it. Harold, second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. We stand adjourned.